The rain started before dawn, thin at first, then hard enough to blur the glass walls of Caldwell Industries into streaks of gray. On the 42nd floor, where executives usually arrived in polished shoes and expensive silence, only one person was there before sunrise. Liam Brooks pushing a janitor's cart slowly across the marble floor, one hand steady on the handle, the other wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. He moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who had learned how to exist without being noticed. His uniform was clean, but worn at the sleeves, his eyes tired from another short night after helping his 8-year-old daughter finish homework under the weak kitchen light before she fell asleep on the couch. Above him, through the glass wall of the boardroom, voices were rising sharply enough that even the sealed doors could not keep the panic hidden. Inside Caldwell Industries, the company that had survived 2 recessions, 3 mergers, and 4 decades under the Caldwell name was dying in real time. Files were spread across the table like evidence in a trial. Investors had just abandoned a final rescue call. Senior executives were blaming one another in clipped, expensive voices. At the center stood Ava Caldwell, perfectly composed from a distance, though the tension in her hand betrayed her as she reached for the final document placed in front of her, the bankruptcy filing. The paper waited under the boardroom lights like a sentence already decided. Liam kept mopping, but his eyes lifted once when one loose page slipped from the edge of the conference table and drifted near the doorway as an assistant rushed past without noticing. It landed half open near his cart. He should have ignored it. A janitor had no business looking at executive reports. But one number, just one, caught his eye so violently that he stopped breathing for half a second. A depreciation line. A decimal placed where instinct told him it should never be. He bent slightly, staring longer than he should have. Inside the room, Ava lowered her pen. "Once I sign this," she said, voice steady but hollow, "Caldwell Industries officially enters bankruptcy protection." No one answered. Rain hammered harder against the glass. Liam looked again at the figure, then toward the room, then back at the number as if hoping it would correct itself. It didn't. His grip tightened around the wet handle of the mop. The CFO had already slid the final page closer to Ava. The pen touched paper. And that was the exact second Liam Brooks, poor invisible, a single father everyone passed without seeing, pushed open the boardroom door and said, "Ma'am, I think you missed one number." Liam Brooks froze the moment every head inside the boardroom turned toward him. For one stretched second, the only sound on the 42nd floor was rain striking the glass in hard, relentless sheets and the faint squeak of one wheel on his janitor cart still rolling because he had forgotten to stop it completely. The silence that followed his interruption felt heavier than the storm outside. 10 executives in dark, tailored suits stared as though a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. At the center of the long table, Ava Caldwell kept the pen suspended above the bankruptcy filing, her fingers tightening around it while her eyes narrowed at the man standing in the doorway, wearing gray maintenance gloves and a faded Caldwell Industries badge clipped to a uniform no one in that room had ever looked at closely enough to read. Nathan Pierce, the company's CFO, was the first to react. His mouth bent into visible irritation before he leaned back in his chair and exhaled sharply. "This floor is restricted," he said, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Who let him in?" Liam swallowed but did not step back. His heart was hammering hard enough to make him hear his pulse in his ears, yet his eyes remained fixed on the financial page still half visible near Ava's hand. He knew exactly how absurd this looked. A janitor interrupting the final bankruptcy meeting of a billion-dollar manufacturing company was the kind of thing people laughed about later in elevators. But the number on that page had hit him with the force of instinct sharpened by years he never talked about. Ava finally spoke, her voice low and controlled. "What did you say?" Liam lifted one hand, hesitant, respectful, but steady. "The depreciation figure on page 4, ma'am. The industrial equipment write-down. I think one digit is wrong." Nathan gave a short, incredulous laugh, almost relieved by how ridiculous the moment had become. You think? His tone sharpened. You mop floors. Liam nodded once, not offended, because that part was true. Yes, sir. But that number shouldn't match the quarter-end carrying balance if the Texas plant assets were already partially recovered last fiscal cycle. Now, even the room itself seemed to shift. Two executives exchanged glances. Ava's eyes moved from Liam to the document in front of her, then slowly back to him. For the first time, she did not dismiss him immediately. Come here, she said. Nathan turned toward her. Ava, with respect, I said, come here. Liam stepped forward carefully, shoes leaving faint rainwater marks on polished marble. He knew his hands looked rough against the polished edge of the boardroom table, knew he smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and cold morning rain, knew every person there expected him to collapse under the weight of their stare. But the closer he got, the clearer the page became. He pointed directly to the line item. This number says asset depreciation increased by $84 million after impairment adjustment. But if that's true, your deferred tax position should move with it here. He pointed lower. It doesn't. It stays tied to the old figure. Nathan leaned forward immediately. Enough. This is not... But Ava had already slid the sheet toward the junior analyst seated near the wall. Recalculate it, she said. The analyst blinked, uncertain whether she was serious, then pulled the laptop closer and began typing. The room held its breath in awkward silence while Liam stepped back, unsure whether he had just destroyed the only job keeping rent paid. Nathan folded his arms, face hardening. You're wasting time we don't have. Ava didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the analyst's screen. Liam could feel everyone waiting for humiliation to arrive, and part of him wanted it over quickly so he could return to the hallway, finish polishing the glass, and pretend none of this had happened. Then the analyst stopped typing. His expression changed, first small, almost invisible, then unmistakable. Wait. Nathan's jaw tightened. What? The analyst typed again, slower this time. The tax carry-forward formula linked to the wrong depreciation input. Another analyst leaned over. No Chexel D42. They both stared. Ava rose from her chair. Say it clearly. The analyst looked up pale now. If this figure is corrected, Caldwell Industries is overstating loss exposure by $47.2 million. No one moved. Rain thundered harder outside, as if the sky itself had leaned closer to listen. Nathan stood immediately. That's impossible. The analyst rotated the laptop. The formula references archived impairment values before the Texas insurance recovery posted. Ava stared at the screen. Her hand loosened around the pen. How long has that error been in the model? At least 3 revisions. Nathan stepped forward too quickly. That doesn't change liquidity pressure. But the second analyst had already started checking linked sheets. Wait, cash reserve ratio changes too. Another voice. Debt trigger threshold isn't breached if this correction holds. Ava looked at Liam now, not as interruption, but as anomaly. How did you see that Liam hesitated? Because the answer was not simple, and not something he had offered anyone here before. The number just didn't belong. Nathan laughed again, but this time the sound carried strain. This is absurd. Are we restructuring corporate decisions around janitorial intuition now? Ava ignored him. What's your name? Liam Brooks. How long have you worked here? 3 years. Nathan snapped. And before that, cleaning somewhere else. Liam did not answer immediately. His silence annoyed Nathan more than words would have. Ava noticed that too. Before that, she asked again, quieter now. Liam glanced briefly toward the rain-streaked windows. Before that, I was studying applied mathematics. Then life changed. He left it there. Nathan scoffed openly. A dropout mathematician now auditing billion-dollar filings. But the second analyst interrupted, voice shaking now with rising adrenaline. He's right about another line, too. All heads turned again. The inventory impairment reserve is linked to the same outdated table. Nathan's face lost color for the first time. Ava moved around the table herself, reading the numbers directly. Every correction widened the gap between collapse and survival. Not safety, certainly not safety, but not immediate bankruptcy either. 47 million became 52, then 58. Then debt covenant timing shifted 3 months forward, then 6. Ava slowly lowered herself back into her chair, staring at the filing paper she had nearly signed. It suddenly looked less like inevitability and more like a weapon laid down too early. "Who built this model?" she asked without looking up. Nathan answered too fast. "Finance team under my supervision. Who approved the revisions we all did." But now the room no longer belonged to Nathan's confidence. Something had cracked. Liam felt it too, the subtle shift when powerful people stopped trusting the person who had always controlled the room. Ava placed the pen flat on the table instead of signing. "Nobody leaves." Her voice changed entirely colder now, sharper, fully CEO again. "We audit every linked schedule before noon." Nathan protested immediately. "Investors are already expecting the filing. Then they wait." She looked directly at Liam. "You stay too." Liam blinked. "Ma'am, if you saw one number, you may see another." He looked at the mop cart still waiting by the door, absurdly abandoned like evidence of another life. "My shift." "Your shift just changed." Nathan stepped closer, voice low enough to sound polite but edged with threat. "This is reckless, Ava." She met his gaze without blinking. Signing bankruptcy based on corrupted figures would be reckless. For the first time, Nathan had no immediate answer. Liam remained standing near the boardroom wall while analysts reopened files, spreadsheets multiplying across screens like battlefield maps. Every 10 minutes, another inconsistency surfaced. Some were small, some were not. A deferred maintenance reserve duplicated. A vendor liability counted twice. A shipment insurance claim recorded but excluded from liquidity summary. None of them alone saved the company. Together they transformed the story being told to the board. Outside the room, employees arriving for work noticed unusual movement, executives not leaving, analysts running, assistants whispering. Rumors spread floor by floor before 8:30. Bankruptcy paused. Something had happened upstairs. No one knew the trigger was the janitor standing quietly beside a wall trying not to think about the school call he would need to make because he was now late picking up Emily's morning medication form from her teacher. Ava finally looked up again after nearly an hour. "Mr. Brooks." Liam straightened instantly. "Yes, ma'am." "Why were you looking at executive reports?" The question was fair, direct, and impossible to dodge. Liam answered honestly. "The page fell near my cart. And you just happened to notice a formula error." He hesitated, then answered with quiet dignity. "Numbers stay in my head, ma'am. Sometimes they don't let go when something feels wrong." Ava studied him for a long moment, measuring whether humility was hiding arrogance or something rarer, truth without performance. Nathan spoke before she could continue. "Even if there are corrections, this doesn't erase collapse." But one analyst answered before Ava did. "Actually, it changes whether collapse happens this week or whether we still have room to fight." Ava leaned back slowly, eyes never leaving Nathan now. "Then we fight." She took the unsigned bankruptcy filing, folded it once, and set it aside. Across the glass wall, lightning flashed behind the skyline, illuminating Liam Brooks in his janitor uniform, standing in the middle of a boardroom where no one would ever look at him the same way again, though none of them yet understood that the wrong number was only the first crack in something far larger hidden beneath Caldwell Industries. By 9:30 that morning, the atmosphere on the executive floor had changed so completely that even employees in lower departments could feel it without knowing why. Elevators opened onto nervous silence. Assistants moved faster, whispering into phones. Legal staff who had expected to process a bankruptcy filing were suddenly told to wait. The sealed boardroom doors remained shut, But inside the long, polished table that had been prepared for surrender had become a battlefield of spreadsheets, revised ledgers, printed audits, and screens glowing with numbers that no longer obeyed the narrative Nathan Pierce had presented for months. Liam Brooks stood near the back wall with both hands clasped in front of him, still wearing his maintenance gloves, because no one had told him what someone like him was supposed to do after interrupting the collapse of a billion-dollar company. Every few minutes, another analyst called out a discrepancy, a duplicated reserve, a deferred liability carried twice across 2 reporting periods. Insurance reimbursements recorded in subsidiary sheets but excluded from executive summary projections. None of it looked accidental anymore. Ava Caldwell remained standing instead of sitting, leaning over the central monitor, while strands of dark hair slipped loose from the severe knot she usually wore without flaw. The composure that had defined her 30 minutes earlier had changed into something sharper, more dangerous. Nathan Pierce kept insisting each inconsistency had procedural explanations, but every explanation arrived half a second too late, as though he were constructing them while speaking. This happens in transitional quarters, he said, when another analyst identified a mislinked debt covenant trigger. Complex models drift. But the youngest analyst in the room, Daniel Kerr, shook his head without realizing he had done so in front of senior leadership. Not like this. These formulas were manually overridden. That single sentence altered the room again. Ava slowly turned. Manually. Daniel swallowed, aware he had crossed into territory where careers disappeared. Yes, ma'am. Auto-reference was broken and replaced with hard values in at least 6 linked cells. Nathan stepped forward instantly. Temporary patching during quarter-end review. Standard practice. But Liam looked up for the first time in several minutes, eyes narrowing toward the screen. Something about the highlighted cell references had caught him the same way the first number had. He moved before thinking and leaned slightly toward Daniel's monitor. That timestamp, he said quietly. Daniel glanced up. What about it? Liam pointed. Those edits were made after midnight. Nathan snapped immediately. Enough. He doesn't belong in this room. But Daniel was already checking the metadata. His fingers flew across the keyboard, then stopped. 2:13 a.m. 3 nights ago. Another analyst opened the edit log. Same login credentials for all 6 changes. Ava's gaze moved slowly toward Nathan, whose credentials Nathan answered too quickly. Mine, obviously. I oversee final review. Ava did not blink. At 2 in the morning. That's called doing my job. But Liam was staring at the timestamps differently now. Not at the hour, but at what came before it. No, he said almost to himself. That's not the first edit. Daniel frowned and reopened the sequence history. There's an earlier version archived underneath. Another click. Another screen. Then Daniel's face changed. Original values were correct. Silence dropped again. Nathan's voice sharpened. Archived models often contain drafts. Ava stepped closer to the monitor. Who replaced them? Daniel hesitated. The same credentials. For the first time that morning, Nathan lost control of his expression completely. It lasted less than a second, but Ava saw it. Liam saw it too. The room saw it, tiny but irreversible. Ava straightened slowly, voice now dangerously calm. Leave the logs open. Nathan folded his arms, forcing steadiness back into his tone. Ava, this proves nothing except rushed revisions during crisis. Then why wasn't I told? Because you had investors collapsing, creditors threatening lawsuits, and labor contracts burning. I protected you from noise. You protected me from correct numbers. Nathan opened his mouth, but before he answered, the boardroom speakerphone lit up. Incoming call, Mercer Capital, the lead investor who had withdrawn at dawn. Ava stared at it, then pressed accept. Ava came the voice cold and impatient. Our legal team is asking why the filing hasn't been submitted. Every eye in the room moved to her. Ava glanced once at the unsigned bankruptcy packet, then at Nathan, then at the monitor still displaying overwritten figures. "Because we're reviewing a discrepancy." A pause on the line. "What discrepancy?" Nathan stepped closer as if to reclaim control, but Ava lifted one finger, stopping him. "A financial discrepancy significant enough to delay signature." Mercer's tone hardened. "You told us the numbers were final. Apparently they were not." Another silence. Then, "You understand delay changes market response." Ava's answer came colder than before. "Then the market can wait." She ended the call herself. Nathan exhaled sharply. That was reckless. Ava turned toward him fully now. "You keep using that word every time truth appears." Before Nathan could answer, Daniel spoke again, quieter this time. "There's another issue." He projected a new sheet onto the central screen. "Asset transfer schedules. One subsidiary listed as partially liquidated." Liam immediately saw the problem before the others did, because the numbers carried the same pattern as before, small distortions designed to look ordinary until combined. "That subsidiary still owns the South Carolina tooling facility," he said. Nathan slammed a palm lightly onto the table. "This is absurd." Daniel checked. "He's right." Ava's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Daniel scrolled. "The facility was marked impaired, but title transfer never completed. It still counts as collateral." Another analyst ran the debt model again. "Then secured leverage improves by 12%. Nathan's jaw tightened visibly. 12% doesn't save us." "No," Ava said, voice dangerously measured, "but it proves someone wanted us weaker than we were." The room understood what that sentence meant, even before she said more. For the first time, Nathan stopped speaking. Outside, word spread that executive legal had been locked out of filing authority. Middle managers began refreshing internal rumor threads. Some believed investors had returned. Others thought regulators had arrived. No one imagined the company's survival currently depended on a janitor who had not eaten breakfast and was now thinking about whether Emily's school nurse would call if he missed the noon form entirely. Ava noticed him glance once toward the clock. "Do you need to be somewhere?" she asked. Liam hesitated. "My daughter's school by noon." Nathan gave a dry laugh. "This is unbelievable." Ava ignored him. "How old? 8. Who's with her?" "No one until dismissal." Ava studied him briefly, then looked at her assistant through the glass wall and motioned her inside. "Call Brookside Elementary. Tell them Emily Brooks's paperwork is delayed and covered by corporate authorization." Liam stared at her, caught off guard enough that words failed him. "Ma'am, that's not necessary." Neither was bankruptcy, apparently. The assistant nodded and left immediately. Nathan's irritation sharpened into visible anger. "We are not turning executive crisis into personal charity," Ava answered without looking at him. "We are correcting priorities." Then Daniel called again, voice suddenly strained. "There are external transfers." Everyone turned. "What transfers?" Ava asked. Daniel opened treasury logs. 3 consulting disbursements routed through Harbor Strategic Advisory. Nathan's face changed again. Smaller this time, but enough. Ava saw it. How much? 9.8 million total. Consulting for what Daniel searched attachments. None appeared. No deliverables attached. Nathan spoke quickly. "Emergency restructuring advisors. Paid before board approval?" Ava asked. "Temporary authorization under CFO emergency powers." Liam said nothing, but his eyes moved to the transfer dates. Same week the bankruptcy narrative accelerated. Same midnight pattern. Same tightening sequence. He finally spoke carefully. "Were those transfers booked as loss prevention expense?" Daniel checked and froze. "Yes." Ava looked at Nathan now as if seeing him for the first time, stripped of title. "Who owns Harbor Strategic?" Nathan answered, but slower now. Independent external group. Daniel typed again, then stopped. Registered 6 months ago. Owner Ava asked. Daniel hesitated. Proxy filing. But linked address matches Mercer Capital legal offices. That landed harder than anything yet. Even the room's air changed. Mercer Capital, the same investor pressing for immediate bankruptcy, was connected to unexplained transfers booked through Nathan's office. Nathan stepped back then, forward again, calculating too fast. That proves nothing. Corporate structures overlap. Ava walked toward him slowly. It proves enough that you are done speaking until legal arrives. Nathan laughed once, but there was no confidence left in it. Legal. Based on spreadsheet paranoia and janitorial intuition, Ava's answer came like steel. Based on repeated manipulated numbers, midnight overrides, concealed transfers, and your panic every time truth surfaces. Nathan looked around the room, searching for support. No one moved. No one rescued him, because numbers had already chosen sides. He tried once more, softer now. Ava, think carefully. If this leaks, stock collapses anyway. Then better it collapses honestly than be stolen quietly. She pressed the internal security button herself. 2 corporate security officers arrived less than a minute later. Nathan stared at them, disbelief slowly turning into fury. You can't seriously escort Mr. Pierce to conference room C, Ava said. No device access, no external calls. Nathan turned once toward Liam before security took his arm. That look held no embarrassment now, only cold hatred sharpened by the realization that the invisible man he had mocked had shifted the entire axis of power in under 2 hours. When the door closed behind him, silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one carried adrenaline, fear, possibility. Ava exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning and looked toward Liam. Tell me the truth. Who are you really? Liam looked uncomfortable under the question. Just Liam Brooks. No, Ava said quietly. People don't read collapsed models like weather unless numbers have mattered to them before. He hesitated because this was the part he never gave anyone. Not employers, not neighbors, not school staff. 10 years ago, he said, finally, I was at Northwestern. Mathematics and systems modeling. Graduate track. Daniel looked up immediately. Ava remained still. Liam continued, voice even. I left when my wife got sick. Hospital bills came first. Then after she died, my daughter came first. No one interrupted. Even analysts typing had stopped. I took warehouse work. Then night shifts. Then this. Ava asked the obvious next question, and never went back. Liam looked at the floor briefly. Some things don't wait for you while you survive. The room stayed quiet because everyone there understood survival only in abstract numbers until that moment. Ava turned toward the screens again, but her tone changed. Then, survive with us a little longer, Mr. Brooks. Daniel reran the corrected model one final time. Debt thresholds stabilized. Bankruptcy unnecessary for now. Not victory, but time. Time enough to fight. Time enough to expose what Nathan had started. Time enough for a company that had already believed itself dead to discover that someone had been trying to bury it early. And outside, the storm sunlight finally began pushing through one narrow break in the clouds, reflecting across the glass wall behind Liam Brooks, while far below, employees entering Caldwell Industries had no idea the company still existed at noon because a poor single father refused to ignore one number that felt wrong. At 12:17 p.m., Caldwell Industries stopped feeling like a company in crisis and started feeling like a building hiding a crime. The executive floor, usually ruled by polished routines and carefully measured voices, had become tense with contained urgency. Security stood near elevators. Legal counsel arrived carrying tablets and sealed folders. Analysts no longer whispered because every new spreadsheet opened like another layer of something rotten underneath the surface. Ava Caldwell had not left the boardroom once since dawn, but the woman who had nearly signed bankruptcy papers now looked nothing like the exhausted CEO from Sunrise. Her posture had sharpened. Her voice had lost fatigue and gained precision. Every question she asked now landed like a blade aimed exactly where fear lived. Liam Brooks remained near the long side wall, no longer invisible, but still unsure what place existed for him inside a room where every word now changed millions of dollars. He had removed his maintenance gloves, folding them carefully into his pocket, because somehow keeping them on now felt wrong, as if he were holding onto a disguise that had already cracked. Daniel Kerr projected the newest forensic report onto the wall. More transfers had surfaced. Not random errors, structured diversions. 3 consulting firms linked through shell ownership. Deferred vendor liabilities intentionally delayed. Asset valuations depressed only in executive-facing summaries, while operational files retained healthier figures deeper in the reporting chain. Legal counsel, a sharp woman named Rebecca Sloan, scrolled silently before finally speaking. "This is coordinated." No one answered because everyone already knew. Ava looked toward the glass wall where storm clouds had thinned into pale afternoon light. How much exposure Rebecca did not soften it. Enough that if Mercer Capital pushed bankruptcy while these numbers stood, they could force distressed acquisition terms and carve the company apart in less than 30 days. Daniel added quietly, "At a fraction of true value." Ava's jaw tightened. Liam noticed because it was the first visible crack she had allowed herself all day. "So they weren't rescuing us," she said. "They were waiting for us to kneel." Rebecca nodded once. "And someone inside helped prepare the fall." The room turned naturally toward the empty chair where Nathan Pierce had sat only hours ago. But before Ava could answer, the boardroom doors opened and one of the security officers stepped in. "Ma'am, Mr. Pierce is requesting counsel." Ava's face remained unreadable. "He'll get counsel after he answers one question." She stepped out herself, motioning Rebecca to follow. Liam stayed behind, but through the glass corridor, he could see Nathan seated in conference room C, tie loosened. Now arrogance thinned into anger. Even from a distance, Nathan's eyes locked immediately onto Ava with the confidence of a man still convinced he could talk his way back into control. Inside the boardroom, Daniel quietly reran another linked model, then glanced toward Liam. "You really saw all this from one line?" Liam looked at the screen rather than at him. "No. I saw one thing that usually means there's another thing behind it." Daniel studied him, then asked what no one else had yet dared ask directly. "Why stay a janitor if you can do this?" Liam's answer came without bitterness, only tired honesty. "Because hospitals don't pause bills while you finish degrees, because funerals cost money, because children still need breakfast whether your life makes sense or not." Daniel looked away, first embarrassed by how simple and heavy that answer sounded in a room full of salaries that had never learned survival that closely. Across the hall, Ava entered conference room C. Nathan leaned back, forcing composure. "You're making a mistake." Ava stood across from him without sitting. "Who at Mercer Capital?" Nathan smiled faintly. "You think this ends with me?" "Answer." "You built your father's company on loyalty myths, Ava. Markets don't care about legacy. They care who gets there first." Who Nathan leaned forward now. "They offered survival. You were already bleeding. Investors gone. Plants underperforming. Credit lines tightening. I didn't create weakness. I monetized inevitability." Ava's voice lowered dangerously. "You rewrote numbers. I accelerated what would happen anyway." $9.8 million. Nathan shrugged. "Consulting fees." Ava took one step closer. "You nearly forced me to bury 4,000 jobs before lunch." That finally broke some of Nathan's composure. "And you nearly signed because deep down you believed it too, that you weren't strong enough to save what your father built." Ava's face did not move, but the sentence landed because it touched something true. Nathan saw it and pushed harder. Now your miracle comes from a janitor. That's your rescue story, Ava answered colder than before. No. My rescue story is that one honest man noticed what all my executives were too proud to see. She turned to leave, but Nathan spoke again, softer now, almost amused. Then ask your honest man why he recognized those formulas so quickly. Men like him don't disappear into maintenance unless they're running from something too. Ava paused, for 1 second only. Then she left. Back inside the boardroom, she found Liam helping Daniel compare timestamps manually, because the archived server logs had begun revealing something stranger. One set of corrected values existed months earlier in a hidden backup folder, then vanished. Ava stopped near them. Nathan says men like you don't disappear without a reason. Liam looked up, understanding immediately that Nathan had aimed precisely where old wounds lived. Ava continued, quieter than before. Were you running from something? Daniel looked away, sensing the question no spreadsheet could answer. Liam hesitated longer this time because the answer was not professional history. It was grief. After my wife died, he said I took contract work building predictive models for a logistics firm in Chicago. I was good at it, too good maybe, but I kept missing school calls, doctor appointments, parent meetings. My daughter learned how to wait quietly in office lobbies while I chased numbers for people who forgot her name before lunch. Ava said nothing. Liam's eyes returned to the monitor. One day she fell asleep under my desk while I was fixing someone else's quarterly disaster. I looked at her and realized if I kept climbing, I'd lose the only thing I still had left. Daniel stopped typing entirely now. Liam continued, voice even but thinner. So I left, took whatever paid rent and let me pick her up myself. Ava studied him differently after that. Not admiration, not pity, something heavier, recognition of sacrifice without applause. Before she could answer, Rebecca Sloan returned with new documents. We have another problem. She placed a folder on the table. Mercer Capital had filed notice demanding emergency board vote at 3 p.m. Hostile Restructuring Authority. Ava read the first page and immediately understood the move. They think we're weak enough to force governance. Rebecca nodded. They assume bankruptcy delay means confusion. Daniel looked at the clock. 2 hours, 40 minutes. Ava's mind moved visibly now, strategic instinct fully awake. If they force the vote with Nathan's numbers already seeded into prior filings, they still argue leadership failure. Rebecca added, unless you walk in with proof of manipulation and corrected solvency. Ava turned toward the wall of screens. Then we build proof. What followed felt less like office work and more like war compressed into minutes. Every analyst split tasks. Legal mapped transfer chains. Treasury rebuilt liquidity statements. Daniel extracted metadata. Ava herself reviewed board authority clauses line by line. Liam remained near Daniel until another timestamp caught his attention, small, buried in export logs. Wait. Daniel looked over. Liam pointed. This file was opened from remote access before dawn. Daniel checked source IP, not internal. Rebecca leaned in. Who's Daniel traced the credential? Nathan's login after he was already under security hold. Ava's eyes sharpened instantly. Impossible. Liam looked toward conference room C through the glass corridor and saw it before anyone else, one security officer missing from the door. Ava moved immediately. They crossed the corridor fast enough that chairs scraped behind them. Conference room C stood open. Nathan Pierce was gone. One security badge lay on the floor beside a fallen tablet. Ava swore under her breath for the first time that day. Rebecca pulled her phone. Lock exits. But Liam was already looking beyond the glass wall toward the service elevator at the far end of the floor. The light above it was descending. He took service access, Liam said. Ava turned. How do you know? Because executives don't know it reaches underground parking. He was already moving before she answered. The others followed too late to catch his lead. Liam ran down the service corridor he knew better than anyone in the building. The narrow maintenance path behind executive walls, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Cleaning carts pushed aside as he cut corners only staff ever used. Ava followed in heels, not built for speed, refusing to stop. By the time they reached underground level 2, the elevator doors were sliding open. Nathan was halfway across the concrete garage toward a black sedan waiting with engine running. He looked back once and saw Liam first, not Ava. That surprised him enough to hesitate. "Move!" shouted the driver. Nathan reached the car, but Liam grabbed the rear door before it closed. Nathan slammed his shoulder into him hard. Pain shot through Liam's side, but he held on long enough for Ava to reach them. "Stop!" she shouted, voice echoing through concrete. Nathan ripped free and turned, breathing hard now, tie-loose mask finally gone. "You think this changes anything?" he snapped. "Mercer still owns half your debt by tonight." Ava stood just feet away, breathing hard, eyes blazing. "Not with these logs." Nathan looked at Liam, then at Ava, and laughed, once ragged, now desperate. "You trusted a janitor over your own board." Ava answered without hesitation. "Today, yes." Sirens sounded above them, security finally reaching the garage. Nathan looked toward the exit, calculated the seconds, then dropped the smile entirely. For the first time all day, fear entered his face. And Liam, holding his bruised side in the cold parking structure light, understood something important. The numbers had saved the company from collapse, but the next 2 hours would decide whether truth itself survived the boardroom waiting upstairs. When they returned to the 42nd floor, the building no longer sounded like panic. It sounded like breath being held by hundreds of people who knew something enormous was unfolding, but did not yet know whether they would still have jobs by evening. The hostile board meeting began at exactly 3 o'clock. Outside the glass walls of the executive boardroom, assistants stood still at their desks, pretending to work while watching reflections move across polished surfaces. Inside, every chair was filled. Senior board members had arrived with legal advisors. Mercer Capital, joined by Secure Video, their lead representative, appearing on the large central screen with the calm expression of someone who believed the outcome had already been purchased. Nathan Pierce sat at the far end now under legal supervision jacket, removed, face pale, but trying to recover the authority he had lost in the parking garage. Ava Caldwell stood alone at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the unsigned bankruptcy packet that had nearly ended her family's company that morning. Liam Brooks had been told he could wait outside, but Ava had stopped him before the doors closed. "Stay," she said simply. "You started this truth. You deserve to hear how it ends." So he stood near the wall again, still in his maintenance uniform, side aching from Nathan's shove shoes marked by concrete dust from the garage, looking like the least powerful person in the room, while every person present now knew that without him, none of them would be sitting there discussing survival. Mercer Capital's representative began first. "Given the filing delay and evident executive instability, we formally request restructuring authority under creditor protection provisions." One board member shifted uneasily. Another glanced at Ava, waiting for weakness. But Ava did not sit. She nodded once toward Daniel Kerr, who activated the central presentation. Numbers filled the screen. Corrected ledgers, time-stamped overrides, transfer chains, consulting shell companies, remote access logs, midnight edits tied directly to Nathan's credentials. No dramatic speech came first, only facts, calm and brutal. Rebecca Sloan explained each one with legal precision. By the third slide, Mercer Capital's representative had lost his practiced expression. By the fifth, 2 board members leaned forward. By the 7th, Nathan finally lowered his eyes. Then Ava spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried more force than shouting ever could. "This morning I nearly signed bankruptcy because I trusted fear dressed as certainty. I almost handed this company to people who had already begun dividing it before our employees even knew they were under attack." She turned one page and laid it flat before the board. These numbers were altered to make collapse look inevitable. They were not. Mercer's representative interrupted sharply. Those allegations require formal verification. Ava answered immediately. Which is why federal counsel already has copies. Silence hit the room so hard even the air conditioning became audible. Nathan looked up sharply. Mercer's screen froze for half a second before reconnecting. The board members exchanged glances, no longer shaped by doubt, but by shifting allegiance. One elderly director who had served beside Ava's late father for 20 years finally asked the question everyone had avoided. Then why were we saved by someone outside finance? Ava turned her head slowly toward Liam. For the first time in the meeting, every eye followed hers fully. Liam did not move. Ava's answer came softer now, almost personal. Because everyone inside this room had started listening only to titles. No one answered that either because no defense existed. Daniel projected the final corrected solvency model. Debt pressure remained brutal, but bankruptcy was no longer immediate. 6 months of survival existed if leadership changed, if waste stopped, if trust returned. Mercer Capital attempted one final objection, but the board vote had already shifted before they spoke. 8 votes rejected external restructuring authority. 2 abstained. Nathan Pierce was suspended pending criminal investigation. Mercer Capital's acquisition request was frozen under fraud review. And when the final vote ended, the room that had begun the morning preparing for burial now sat in exhausted silence, stunned not by victory but by how close they had come to disappearing, because everyone had trusted polished confidence over quiet truth. The meeting dissolved slowly. Lawyers remained. Analysts gathered files. Board members approached Ava one by one, offering words that sounded too late to matter. Liam moved quietly toward the door because now that the crisis had ended, he no longer knew whether he belonged there. But Ava called his name before he reached it. Liam. He turned. The boardroom was nearly empty now, late sunlight pouring through the glass, turning the skyline gold behind her. For the first time all day, she did not look like a CEO defending territory. She looked tired in a human way, almost fragile under the weight finally settling after hours of battle. Come with me. She led him not back into another conference room, but down the private hallway to the small executive lounge overlooking the city. There, on a side table, sat the paper she had almost signed that morning. The bankruptcy filing. She picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, then tore it cleanly in half. Then again. The sound was quiet, but final. Liam watched without speaking. Ava placed the torn pieces into the trash and finally faced him. You saved 4,000 people today. Liam shook his head slightly. I saw one number. No. Ava said, almost smiling for the first time you spoke when everyone else had learned how to stay silent. She opened a folder and slid it toward him. Inside was an employment offer senior financial systems advisor. Liam read only the title before looking up. I can't work executive hours. Ava had expected that answer. Then don't. I pick up my daughter every afternoon. Then you still do. Some days she gets sick. Then you leave. Liam studied her carefully, trying to see whether this was gratitude that would fade by Monday. Ava seemed to understand the hesitation. This isn't charity. She leaned lightly against the window city light, catching the exhaustion in her face. It's me fixing one more thing I nearly got wrong. Liam closed the folder without accepting yet. If I say yes, daycare for night shift staff should come before my title. Half your lowest paid employees are surviving impossible schedules. Ava looked at him for a long second, then nodded once. Done. And no layoffs this quarter if the corrected numbers hold. Done. And healthcare review for plant workers. This time Ava gave a tired laugh, small, genuine. You negotiate like someone who knows exactly how expensive survival is. Liam answered quietly, because I do. The sun lowered behind the city warm gold, fading into evening blue. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ava asked softly, What does your daughter think you do here? Liam looked out over the skyline. She says I make things clean before important people arrive. Ava glanced toward the torn bankruptcy papers in the trash. Today she'd be right. An hour later, when Liam finally walked through the main lobby carrying his old janitor gloves in one hand and the unopened folder in the other, employees near the entrance stopped talking as he passed. Some recognized him now. Some had already heard rumors impossible enough to sound invented. No one mocked the silence this time. Outside, the rain had ended completely. Across the street, Emily Brooks waited near the curb under the school's borrowed umbrella, backpack hanging crookedly, waving the moment she saw him. Liam crossed toward her slower because of his bruised side. She looked up immediately. "You're late." "Big day at work," he said. "Did you clean everything?" she asked. He smiled, kneeling despite the pain to adjust her backpack strap. Something like that. Above them, 42 floors up, Ava Caldwell stood alone at the glass window watching father and daughter disappear into evening traffic, and for the first time in many years, the building behind her no longer felt like inheritance alone. It felt like something worth rebuilding, this time with eyes open.